sticking around. So for this next talk, the original plan was to sort of go over the two bills that I'm sure you're all familiar with, the Fair Beer Act and the Small BREW Act. They're two bills in Congress that aim to pretty dramatically cut the federal excise tax rate on every barrel of beer produced in the country. And they were competing for a long time. One was backed by the Beer Institute, the other by the Brewers Association. And we were originally going to talk about that, but as life goes, we woke up this morning and we had a wrench thrown in those plans because we saw a report that said they were, the two groups had come together and basically agreed on a unified bill to push behind. We're still going to push on. We have some experts here who I'll invite up now. We have Jim McGreevy from the Beer Institute, president of the Beer Institute, Craig Purser, president of the National Beer Wholesalers Association, and Larry Bell, founder of Bell's Brewery, to offer some Brewers insights. So if you guys want to join us up here. Thank you guys for taking the time out to join us this afternoon. So I guess just to start, I do have to address that elephant in the room that you guys have reportedly come together and agreed on one bill to cut the federal excise tax rate on every barrel of beer produced. So I guess, Jim, I'll start with you. Can you speak to these reports that the two sides have in fact come together?
Sure, thank you. First of all, thanks, Dave, and thanks, Chris, for the opportunity to be here today. Yeah, it looks like there's going to be unity around one tax relief bill to provide brewers tax relief to the federal beer tax. It's a proposal that will likely come tomorrow, be announced tomorrow by Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon. Senator Wyden has asked us not to say too much about it so we don't steal his thunder, but over the course of the last few weeks, there's been lots of discussions amongst brewers and the different trade associations and distributors about what good proposal could be brought forth that everyone could agree upon. So it looks like we'll know tomorrow for certain, but we at the Beer Institute have always thought that one bill would have a better chance of passing in Congress for excise tax relief and reform. The Brewers Association has always said that if legislators came to them and said that it would be better to have one bill, that they would take that seriously, and I think they have. So we'll see what Senator Wyden says tomorrow.
Awesome. Larry, you've sort of had your foot in both camps here. You're a member of the BA. You're an ex officio board member of the Beer Institute. So from your perspective, what is the significance of these two sides coming together? You've said in the past there were things about both bills, past iterations that you liked and disliked. So what's the significance now of these two camps sort of merging?
Well, I think this is really where we needed to get to. And again, I haven't seen the final bill, but that everybody's on board, I think, speaks volume. There's still going to be some challenges actually getting the bill passed. But as far as I think, and John Mallett, who my general manager, is on the BA board as well, I think for the two groups to come together and put this behind us is vitally important because it was not showing well at Congress. A number of us were there this last week, and I think those in leadership were seeing that these two competing bills, they were either going to be on the sidelines for the industry, or they were getting on board with both bills and trying not to take sides, because at this point most in Congress either have a brewer or a wholesaler within their district and really didn't want to play sides. And it's the thing I was saying to my congressman is we as the industry got to work this out. We got to figure out what we're doing. And anytime you have splits in the industry that are public and dirty laundry, I don't think it's good for the industry. It's not good for us moving ourselves forward, and probably opens us up to attacks on other fronts. If we're unified, we're certainly in a better shape to fight equalization attacks against the beer industry. We're constantly fighting that battle, and I think the Beer Institute is really doing some good things right now to try and fight that war against big spirits industry. So I think, even though we may not get this passed right away, probably not, it's a couple years down the road before, it's after an election before we think about getting this into legislation. This isn't going to come up as a bill tomorrow. Things just don't work that way. But if we have everybody on the same page, I think we can move on and look at the other issues that face us and go forward unified. And I think that's vitally important for us.
So it's kind of more symbolic than if you don't think the odds of it passing are high for this session?
I think if you guys are there all the time, but the way I look at it, there's not a whole lot that's going to happen as far as tax policy. We're already into the election cycle, and to think that Democrats and Republicans are going to come together and have a tax bill that we're going to be able to attach this to, and everybody's going to agree where the money's going to come from, that ain't going to happen. That'll happen after an election. So I think 2017 is probably, you guys are the lobbyists that are there. It's 2017 after the election, and we see which way the winds are blowing, and we can actually have a chance for tax reform where we could get this through. So I don't think any brewers should start counting chickens yet.
Craig, to get your perspective from the wholesaler side of things, I know the NBWA has vocalized their own support in the past of the Fair Beer Act and had cited problems with the Small BREW Act. So from your perspective, from that middle tier, what does this unity mean from that distribution side of things?
Well, thanks very much, Dave, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Just like Jim, I'm not going to jump in and talk about legislation that hadn't been introduced. I think the first rule of being a good lobbyist is let the legislators legislate and let the lobbyists advocate. But as it relates to the whole discussion around this issue, I think being on the same page is a good step, and it's very important. I think Larry's correct as it relates to kind of what's coming next, which is serious talk about tax reform. And more importantly than that, the folks in Washington, D.C. are actually looking for revenue. They're not looking to cut taxes right now. They're trying to patch holes, and there is going to be eventually a larger discussion about tax reform. And that's going to take a whole bunch of forms, and we've all got to be prepared for that. So the more that we can do to educate folks about this industry and about all the positives that are a part of this, all of the things, there's plenty of time and plenty of places for us to talk about those issues that divide us and that are different. But this is a pretty darn good industry. From a tax standpoint, the last time there was a significant discussion about taxes or tax reform was when beer taxes were doubled in 1991. And before that, it was 1986, the last time there was comprehensive tax reform. So it's time in a lot of ways for those discussions to begin, and we all need to put aside our differences and talk about our commonalities as it relates to preparing for this larger discussion.
So why then is tax reform such an important issue to American beer companies? Why is this something that should be at the forefront of their mind if it isn't already? And I'd like to hear all your thoughts on this, but why is it something that they should be devoting their attention to? What will tax reform enable them to do for their businesses?
Well, it's a growing and dynamic industry. The Small BREW Act was advocated in Congress as a job creation bill, and the Fair Beer Act would have been the same thing if it were to pass. So, going up, having the opportunity to go up and talk to the 535 members of Congress and their staffs about the great things going on in beer, as Craig has said, is what's important. We have an opportunity potentially through working together on one bill to create a new structure to the federal beer excise tax that will make it lower for some, and give everybody an opportunity to create the jobs and to have the access to the market that has made this industry so dynamic over the last few years. So that's what's really important about this conversation. Having a unified bill, as others on the couch have said, has, should I keep going? Has also gives us the opportunity to talk about the reputation of beer. And that's where we're going to be able to get ready for the problem, for the potential of a beer excise tax increase, the potential of equalization. In my mind, the number one threat to beer in Washington, D.C. and in the marketplace is spirits. You saw the earlier presentation from IRI. Spirits is making inroads and has for years on beer sales. And the case is the same in Washington, D.C. So having one bill, having to be able to speak with one voice on this one discrete issue helps in a lot of other ways.
Larry, from a brewer's perspective, what will this allow you to do for your business? Where will you be able to reinvest these savings?
Well, going back to your question before, honestly, I think there's been far too much time and energy wasted on worrying about taxes. I think you take a look around this room, take a look around the industry, everybody's doing pretty well. And there's, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of people are getting into the industry. It's because everybody's doing pretty well. I think you may, if this were to pass, yes, there's probably some jobs there. I think certainly on smaller breweries could realize more jobs. When you get up more in my level, I think it's about better jobs. If we're investing in equipment, you're getting better productivity, you're having more skilled labor, so you're probably getting better jobs. But by the time this thing passes, we also could be, I think we'll probably be entering a new phase of this industry. So other things might get done with the money. It might just be spent on marketing. And as we get into price wars and more competition, it could all be spent on that. It could be spent on getting old guys like me paid off and moved out of the industry so the next generation can come up. We certainly need that as well. We've seen deals go down where breweries sell and they just take the money and move on. It's not necessarily put into equipment. So, in theory, it's got some jobs, but by the time the thing comes through, I certainly wouldn't stand up there and guarantee it.
Right. Okay. So
I think the energy that we're spending on taxes is way too much. I think we got other things. Let's put this behind us. We can say, let's look at this 17. Let's talk about the FDA. Let's talk about barley crop insurance.
Right.
Let's talk about those things that can push us forward more.
So, it seems like the whole crux of both of these bills, and I assume this one, I haven't seen it yet, but the whole crux of these bills for the past few years has been that they're job creators. And now I guess we have a brewer sitting here saying he's not sure about that. I guess your organization has spent a lot of time advocating for this. So how would you respond to that we have a prominent brewer who's unsure of the job creation value?
Well, Larry's a member of my trade association, so I'm never going to disagree with the guys. Help him pay the bills, but we'll have to talk later about this. Somebody that's doing 15,000 barrels a year, and if they're going to get an extra $50,000 out of it, they get to buy a couple more tanks. I think on that lower level or that smaller level, there's some job creation. Higher up, is ABI, if they get $12 million out of this, is that really going to create jobs for them? Probably not.
Look, I think Larry makes some valid points, but it's also important to remember that there is this discussion that's going to be coming. How many people are Game of Thrones fans in here? But winter is coming, and winter is coming as it relates to tax reform, and winter is coming as it relates to what Larry alluded to about some other challenges in the industry. we're going to have some capacity issues that are going to be very serious and some things we're going to need to look at and prepare for. And I think in order to do that, we're going to have to move forward from this. I do think, however, that Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon deserves some credit for this, because I do think he is a forward-thinking senator. He's the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee. And while we don't know exactly what the legislation is going to say, I think he's absolutely demonstrated leadership as it relates to moving this ball forward and giving us the opportunity to, talk about some other issues, which is good.
Right. So, Jim, on the bigger side of things, kind of as to build off what Larry was saying, things are good at the smaller end. The people are growing and hiring. Conversely, some of the bigger multinational entities are, and not across the board, but more so on the small side, are cutting jobs and consolidating. So where do you see them playing into this? Where are they going to be reinvesting these funds through tax reform?
Well, that's why I've since I got to the Beer Institute about a year ago, I've always looked at this bill not so much as a job creation bill or other things discussed about it, but really as reform. Brewers need to know what the tax implications are for their production. And if we can get new reforms, if we can lower the excise tax per barrel at varying levels, then there's more certainty going forward that taxes will be lower, and then we can argue to keep them lower into the future. When tax reform in a broader level comes around, when health advocates want to raise the taxes on beer for whatever externalities they feel are happening out in the country, for spirits who wants to come and try to equalize their taxes with beer, it's very important to remember that beer has enjoyed an excise tax advantage to spirits for hundreds of years in this country and in hundreds of other countries, and that's a very important benefit that brewers have. We want to keep that. So having this conversation about tax relief and reform is important in the overall discussion about beer and beer's reputation on Capitol Hill. That's what makes it important. Will it pass tomorrow? No. Will we all be able to work together to make the arguments that it should pass in the near future or after the next election? Yes. And that builds our strength as a category on Capitol Hill.
So I guess to bounce back to Craig to get additional wholesaler input, one of the arguments your organization has put forth in the past against certain aspects of reform has been that it could potentially impact state laws and redefine what it means to be a small brewer on a state-by-state basis. Since we don't yet have the details of this new legislation, I guess the question's still worth asking. How would you foresee that happening, just in general, with a new tax code, and what exactly would be at risk for your members should that happen?
Yeah, and I think we've been pretty clear-throated, especially as of late, about our problems with the tax proposal that would cut one group of brewers' taxes and not treat everyone equally in a more fair manner. As everybody in this room knows, small brewers have a tax differential. Once you pierce a 2 million barrel mark under the current law, you cannot take advantage of that lower tax rate. This would have simply raised up that rate and taken care of some folks that had outgrown the 2 million barrel rate, and we had a problem with that. Our problem with that was its use of the 6 million definition, specifically in a state or two, in attempted legislation that would have treated brewers under that 6 million barrel threshold differently for a whole host of issues. It happened to be there was a piece of legislation that's gotten a lot of attention in the state of Massachusetts where there was differential treatment for how a successor supplier is treated going forward, and that 6 million barrel definition was used. So it wasn't a red herring or something that was made up. It was something that was very aggressively lobbied for in the legislature by that special interest group in that particular state. We have tax policy in some states that mirrors the federal level. For instance, Alaska and Washington State just ripped directly from the federal code as it relates to how they tax brewers based on that 2,060,000 designation. So lots and lots of times states will look to the federal government for guidance, and that's what we were concerned with. That was part of what we're concerned with.
Would such a change to state law have any impact on any other hot button issues such as franchise reform or anything like that?
It could. I mean, there are all kinds of differential treatments. Everybody in this room is aware of it if you think about it. As it relates to retail privileges, as it relates to self-distribution, there are all kinds of differential treatment that exist at the state laws. Many of the people in this room have built their businesses around that differential treatment. So once again, when you're talking about a piece of fundamental tax policy, there's concern about using that marker as guidance in the states for whatever you might think of.
While we're on the subject of franchise reform, and I did want to cover some other legislative issues. So yeah, while on that subject, what is the NBWA doing to sort of facilitate that conversation with breweries in the country to advance that cause? Because it's a controversial issue state by state. So I guess what's your organization doing to be an active and open participant?
Well, first of all, state franchise laws are they are state franchise laws, and they are laws that are held that exist at the state level. And with the growth of new brewers and the explosive just growth of manufacturers, everybody in this room ought to know these statistics. But in 1983, there were fewer than 50 breweries in the United States of America. Today, there are over 3,400. That is an American success story. And that is under a backdrop of a system of open and independent distribution. And when you think about that, everybody in this room, depending on your size, in some way, shape, or form, utilizes that independent distribution network. Franchise laws are one of the laws that help govern that relationship between manufacturers and distributors. And so you've got this broad waterfront of issues and kind of a dynamic that helps support this system that has given rise to all of these new producers. So as it relates to franchise reform, and it gets a lot of attention, some states, other states, it's not nearly as important of an issue. I think it's very important that we first of all encourage people to listen to one another. There are lots and lots of times where we can look at these debates or discussions being fought out on the pages of the newspapers, and Party A hadn't spoken to Party B for 18 months. So we're encouraging folks to have that conversation. We're also encouraging distributors to look really hard when they've got a dispute with their manufacturer partner, with their brewer partner, about what other way forward is there. If somebody wants to leave your business, give that every consideration. If it's a marriage and one party wants out, think about that long and hard. But we're also encouraging brewers to exercise their rights under the law. And that's really, really important. We have a handful of brewers that are very proud of the fact that they've never, for instance, terminated or attempted to terminate for specific non-performance a underperforming distributor. All parties have contracts, have agreements that help govern that relationship. And we have some that simply don't exercise those rights. And they're many and varied. Larry has taken advantage and has certainly exercised his rights under the laws, certainly in more than one state. And, that's got to be part of this discussion before we want to go taking a meat axe to something that has facilitated such meteoric growth.
Well, I wanted to get Larry's take on this too. You've dealt with this firsthand. You've pulled out of markets before you pulled out of Illinois, fittingly enough, given where we are. So, what's your stance on that? Are distributors, in your experience, are they working with you to handle this, or what's your stance on what he just said?
I think Craig is absolutely right. That the reason that we have such a growing and dynamic industry is because we have the three-tier system, and it has worked very well. It's worked well for me. It's worked well for a lot of people in this room, a lot of brewers that have been out there. I hear a lot of new entrants in the industry. You go to a meeting and they say, F the wholesalers. And I'm there saying, now hold on a second, those are my partners, and they've really helped me build my business. And we all hear some war stories, and occasionally there is a disagreement that can't be solved, or there's a personal conflict. I've had a couple of those, but for the most part, what you don't hear about is right now there's just a slew of consolidation or sales going on within the distributor tier. We're dealing with those every stinking day. Could you slow down a little bit, please, so I can go sell some beer instead of doing due diligence all the time? And those all go very well. I signed a contract this morning for an eastern state for a sale. So there's a lot that goes on well there. And I think we have to be, when we talk about franchise reform, you have to be careful about the law of unintended consequences. And, especially I think carve-outs seem like a great idea, but, my number one wholesaler is this fantastic craft beer distributor who has a lot of small players. And if all of a sudden some guy with a bunch of money a couple counties over says, come with me, I'm going to spend all the money, I'm going to give you money, and 10 guys who are all 2% leave his business, he's in trouble. I'm in trouble because I counted on him being around, and I don't think it's necessarily fair to him. So I think when we talk about some of these reforms, we have to really think it through. They've been around for a long time, and we shouldn't just go take the meat cleaver to them. They have helped us out a lot, and in the most cases, brewers and wholesalers work very well together, and we should recognize that and recognize that this system has gotten us to where I started out doing self-distribution. I sure as hell wouldn't want to be doing that right now. No thanks. You guys can run the trucks and worry about transmissions.
And it's funny because part of the conversation that is this industry is listening to folks that are, on the other side of the street. And as it relates to this, I'll never forget, it was probably just about 4 or 5 years ago when a brewer was brand new, and he trucked his beer 18 miles away and back to replenish the on-premise territory that was 5 miles down the street from him. And he said, Craig, this sounds so inefficient, but he said, you know what? I would go broke trying to self-distribute just down the road because of the rolling stock that's required, because of the personnel, because of the cost, labor, all of the things related to just going and, in a sense, cherry-picking or high-spotting an entertainment district that was 5 miles from his brewery. Now, that's not always the case. We know that a number of states allow self-distribution, and that's a great vehicle, where legal, for folks to help get established. But as it relates to all of these complicated issues and this meteoric rise that we all should celebrate, I think lots and lots of times we get in our own little silos, and this seems true for larger brewers or smaller brewers, and we don't share in each other's success. This is a wonderful industry. And, I just think, we can let our differences define us, which are small, or we can let our commonality and our success define us, and that's a better way to go.
I also wanted to give you an opportunity, Jim. We just touched on some state-by-state issues with franchise reform and self-distribution a little bit. You're more on the federal side of things. What are you seeing there? What's a pressing matter on Capitol Hill right now for brewers?
Yeah, I want to just echo what Craig just said. We should be celebrating our commonalities more. Beer is a regulated industry, particularly in the states. That means stakeholders are pitted against each other in a fight in a state capitol or over a regulation. In Washington, D.C., it's a little different. We're talking more about broader national policy. We're not talking about franchise rules and things like that. So we have an opportunity as large brewers, small brewers, distributors retailers to be on the same page in many ways on lots of issues. One of them would be menu labeling. Menu labeling is going to be something that affects everyone in this room potentially on December 1st, 2015, and we still don't have the necessary guidance from the FDA to understand how beer will be accommodated in those new menu labeling rules. There's some talk in Congress about delaying the implementation on December 1st. We are engaged in discussions with the FDA, partnering with BA on that, and the NBWA and others to make sure that the FDA understands how the beer business works and how menu labeling will affect brewers. That's the kind of thing we have to focus on more. And I think in Washington politics, there's lots of opportunities for that.
Just to wrap up quick, we're kind of running up on time, but just to sort of bring it all together, even when there is sort of disagreement and conflict within the industry stakeholders, you guys still kind of all rely on one another. You still need to work together, both by law and just by practice. So when things do get, I guess, contentious or there's a conflict, how do you, I guess, just navigate these relationships to keep them beneficial while sort of working out your differences? I guess if you all have, I hate to cut you off, but just very brief thoughts about it.
You know, I think we've seen a few examples over the last decade or so of one group doing something and saying and defending their position or coming with a position, and another group having a reaction to it and saying, well, nah, you can't come play in my sandbox anymore. You're not invited to my conference, or I'm not throwing a party for you because you did this, and we got to stop that. And, you know, keep doing what you're doing, keep the dialogue open, but saying, you know, we're going to now split ourselves up more over a single issue because we've got this, like you say, we all depend upon each other, and having those public kind of spats never does any good for us.
You know, I call, when I get a question like this, I look at this room and I see how much youth and enthusiasm there is here, and I realize that there are folks that don't necessarily appreciate those that came before us, but there was a great leader in this industry by the name of Henry King, who spent a number of years running the United States Brewers Association, and then in his twilight ran a group called the Brewers Association of America. And Henry had a long history and a lot of water passed under the bridge of his activities on behalf of the industry. But he had a saying that was always resonated with me, which was the whole notion of being able to disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that's important, whether it's a difference on a tax package or a difference on a state regulation or a difference on an issue like franchise. It's super important, and more important than ever, I think, to keep the lines of communication open. No matter what is going on, it's more important to keep those lines open when you're disagreeing sometimes even than when you're agreeing. So I think we all can borrow a page from that playbook about, you know, and don't get me wrong, I love a good fight. I love a good disagreement. The disagreements that we've had over the years are well known, but it's okay because at the end of the day, if you understand each other's position better, you actually have a better disagreement, and that's good.
And Henry King's retirement luncheon was a hoot because Bill Coors gave the lunch speech and quoted the Bible a lot.
Yeah. Anytime that occurred, we were all just, what are they going to say next?
Parting words, Jim?
I think to that point in particular, I'll just say very simply that we all know that beer is a very human business, and it's a very, very much a business based on relationships. And to the point of trying to continually find common ground, it's probably best to remember what we say to some of our little kids, which is use your listening ears. And I think if we all use our listening ears, it's going to be very good for beer in the future in this world of politics and policy.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Round of applause for these gentlemen.